Many of you, when you hear the word muscle, think muscle growth and building big muscles. And while we will touch on muscle hypertrophy, muscle growth today, and science-based protocols to enhance hypertrophy, we will mainly be talking about muscle as it relates to the nervous system. And I can't emphasize this enough. The whole reason why you have a brain is so that you can move. And one of the things that's exquisite and fantastic about the human... There's an important principle of muscle physiology called the Henneman size principle. And the Henneman size principle essentially says that we recruit what are called motor units. Motor units are just the connections between nerve and muscle in a pattern that staircases from low threshold to high threshold. What this means is when you pick up something that is light, you're going to use the minimum amount of nerve to muscle energy in order to move that thing. Likewise, when you pick up an object that's heavy, you're going to use the minimum amount of nerve to muscle connectivity and energy in order to move that object. So it's basically a conservation of energy principle. Now, if you continue to exert effort of movement, what will happen is you will tend to recruit more and more motor units with time. And that process of recruiting more neurons, more lower motor neurons, as if you recall from the beginning of the episode, these lower motor neurons are in our spinal cord and they actually dump a chemical, acetylcholine, on muscle, cause the muscles to contract. As you recruit more and more of these motor units, these connections between these lower motor neurons and muscle, that's when you start to get changes in the muscle. That's when you open the gate for the potential for the muscles to get stronger and to get larger, if that's what your goal is. Heavy weights can help build muscle and strength, but they are not required. What one has to do is adhere to a certain number of parameters, just a couple of key variables that I'll spell out for you. And if you do that, you can greatly increase muscle hypertrophy, muscle size, and or muscle strength if that's what you want to do. And you don't necessarily have to use heavy weights in order to do that. Once you know roughly your one repetition maximum, the maximum amount of weight that you can perform an exercise with for one repetition in good form, full range of motion, that it's very clear that moving weights or using bands or using body weight, for instance, in the 30 to 80% of one rep maximum, that is going to be the most beneficial range in terms of muscle hypertrophy and strength, so muscle growth and strength. Now, it is clear, however, that one needs to perform those sets to failure where you can't perform another repetition in good form again, or near to failure. For the typical person who hasn't done a lot of weight training, you need to do at least 5 sets per muscle group. Now, that's just to maintain. And then there's this huge range that goes all the way up to 15 and in some case 20 sets per week. Now, how many sets you perform is going to depend on the intensity of the work that you perform. 10% of the sets of a given workout or 10% of workouts overall should be of the high intensity sort where one is actually working to muscular failure. So how do we know if we've recovered? How can we test recovery? And this is not just recovery from resistance training. This is recovery from running, recovery from swimming. There are 2 measures, however, whether or not you recovered that you can use first thing in the morning when you wake up, maybe after 5-10 minutes if you like, but ideally right when you wake up, in order to assess how well recovered you are and therefore whether or not you should train your whole system at all that day. The first one is grip strength. Grip strength, the ability to generate force at the level of squeezing the fist or, squeezing down on something, might seem like kind of a trivial way to assess recovery, but it's not, because it relates to your ability to use your upper motor neurons to control your lower motor neurons and to generate isolated force. And so that's really what you're assessing when you do that. Some people will use, one of these grip tools. You can also take a floor weight and, a floor scale and squeeze the scale and see how much force you can generate. If you start seeing a 10% or 20% certainly reduction in that, that's concerning. It means that your system, your nervous system as a whole, it's not necessarily fatigued. It's that the pathways from nerve to muscle are still in the process of rewiring themselves in order to generate force. The other one that's really terrific is carbon dioxide tolerance. So this is a really interesting tool that endurance athletes, strength athletes, I think can all benefit from. Another tool for recovery that people are very excited about is the use of cold and the ice bath. Athletes who are trying to recover quickly so that they can get back into more training sessions, or let's say you're somebody who doesn't really want to gain much strength or hypertrophy, and you're mainly focused on endurance and you want to do more endurance work and you've been weight training, well, then exposing yourself to cold can be beneficial, but you're not going to get as great of benefits from the resistance training. In other words, cold after resistance training seems to short circuit some of the benefits of that resistance training. The other thing are non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs. You know their trade names. These are painkillers that many people take, can interfere with the benefits of endurance training and the benefits of resistance training. In addition to that, they block pain signals, and pain is a very good signal that you might be doing something wrong. And so while nobody likes to be in pain, the non-steroid anti-inflammatories, the NSAIDs as they're called, and the antihistamines seem to prevent a lot of the gains, the improvements in endurance, strength, and size that people are specifically using exercise for. So be cautious about your use of non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs, especially within the 4 hours preceding or the 4 hours following exercise. There are also tools that one can use to reduce inflammation at a kind of foundational level away from training. And these are tools that I've talked about many times before, but I'll just restate them again. The kind of golden three, according to Andy Galpin, and the ones that he recommends are sufficient omega-3s. Again, that can be accomplished through diet, through whole food intake, or through supplementation, or both. So in general, getting above 1,000 milligrams of EPA per day to keep inflammation low or relatively low. Vitamin D, and in some cases, magnesium malate. Magnesium malate seems to be particularly effective in offsetting delayed onset muscle soreness. In general, the omega-3, vitamin D, and magnesium malate trio seem to be an effective way to reduce inflammation at kind of a systemic level. But remember, you want inflammation provided you're not damaging the muscle so much that you're injured during the training session, because that's the stimulus for change in those muscles. Weight training, unlike a lot of other forms of exercise, has a unique aspect to it, which is this feature that I guess some people call it the pump, which is the fact that blood goes into the muscle when you train. It's the only kind of training where you actually get a window into what the result might actually look like before you actually accomplish that result. The first thing that's absolutely key for nerve to muscle communication and physical performance of any kind, that's salt. Nerve cells, neurons, communicate with each other and communicate with muscle by electricity. But that electricity is generated by particular ions moving into and out of the neuron. And the rushing in of a particular ion, sodium, salt, is what allows nerve cells to fire. If you don't have enough salt in your system, your neurons and your brain and your nerve to muscle communication will be terrible. If you have sufficient salt, it will be excellent. How much salt will depend on how much water you're drinking, how much caffeine you're drinking, and how much food you're ingesting. So you want to make sure that you have enough salt, potassium, and magnesium in your system if you want to perform well. If you're going to train at a regular time, you can take the days when you don't train and use that to enhance your cognitive focus for things that have nothing to do with exercise. So this might be writing or reading or music or math, etc.